The story begins in Ebelstein, a city steeped in old stone walls and medieval charm. Within its poorest districts lived an aging mage whom the slum dwellers mockingly called the false archmage. His title came from the simple truth that he could only wield one-star magic. Despite this limitation, the old man carried himself as if he were a legendary spellcaster, easily angered and quick to lash out at anyone who challenged his pride. From a distance, the protagonist quietly observed his teacher's restless expression. It was this very man who had first introduced him to magic. There had been no grand reason for becoming his apprentice, only convenience. The old mage needed students to inherit his crude techniques, and the boy sought knowledge wherever he could find it. Their goals happened to align. Time passed, marked by changing seasons and endless practice. One afternoon during training, a faint blue glow began to form around the boy's body. He clenched his jaw, struggling to restrain the energy surging through him. The sight stunned the old mage. Had the boy already grasped the natural circulation of mana? With resolve burning in his eyes, the boy took the next step. Power gathered in his palm before bursting outward in a sudden release. The spell took shape midair, forming a dense, shovel-like construct of magic that shot forward. The old mage could only stare as it slammed directly into a tree, splintering bark and shaking the ground. Teacher and student stood frozen, stunned by what they had just witnessed. That was how the boy spent an entire year, absorbing everything his master could teach. He ran errands, completed menial jobs, and slowly carved out his place as a one-star mage. One night, while they camped beneath the open sky, the old mage drank himself into a bitter mood. Slurring his words, he complained that noble children reached 3 stars before adulthood. He warned the boy not to dream too big, insisting that commoners could never break past 2 stars. According to him, bloodline determined everything, and effort meant nothing. The boy listened in silence, understanding that these words reflected his master's own regrets rather than truth. That night felt endless as he watched the old man eventually pass out. The next day, rain poured relentlessly as the boy returned to camp. What he found stopped him cold. His master lay motionless on the ground, his body battered and bruised as if he had fought desperately before dying. At first, the boy assumed the old mage had picked a reckless fight. The truth was far crueler. The old man had been beaten to death by city guards after being caught attempting to steal a 2-star spellbook. No one understood why a man who preached resignation would risk everything for advancement. As the boy stood there in shock, a translucent system interface appeared before his eyes. Memories of bloodlines and limitations echoed in his mind. None of it mattered to him. He possessed no noble lineage to rely on. The screen informed him that he had unlocked the fundamentals of magic and must now choose a primary magical path. From that moment on, 4 years passed in a blur. During that time, he met Quasar Flameheart, a formidable 3-star mage and former head of House Flameheart. Living in Ebelstein, she survived by taking mercenary contracts and eventually took the boy under her wing, teaching him real combat experience. Much of his growth occurred in Belden's Tier, a lively tavern where warriors and mages gathered. Quasar often reminded him that ambition was natural for a mage, and she acknowledged his talent without hesitation. But she warned him that unchecked desire could become a chain rather than a ladder. The boy accepted her words earnestly, promising to keep them close to heart. During one training session, Quasar instructed him to close his eyes and sense his mana. Calmly, carefully, he followed her guidance, visualizing the flow, shaping it with intent. A blue radiance enveloped his body, steady and controlled. Quasar noted that his mana reserves were unusually deep, and his precision was remarkable. Then, without warning, his eyes flared purple. The pressure of his magic intensified dramatically, startling even Quasar. Before she could speak, a deafening explosion shook the air outside. Panic rippled through the tavern as patrons shouted, wondering if the city was under attack. Someone rushed outside to investigate. Suddenly, Quasar seized the boy's hand. She whispered urgently for him to stay quiet and follow her. As city guards began searching for the source of the blast, she pulled him into a narrow alley, moving quickly through the chaos. Confused and alarmed, the boy called out to her, asking what was happening. But for now, she only kept moving. Quasar suddenly halted in the narrow alley and turned to face him. Her expression hardened as she told him to listen closely to every word that followed. Sensing the gravity of the moment, the boy straightened and nodded, signaling that he was ready. She explained that the noble class fiercely guarded its privileges, and among them, magic stood above all else. Innate talent was considered a divine blessing only when it appeared in noble bloodlines. Commoners, on the other hand, were rarely allowed the chance to evolve, making any sign of unusual strength deeply unsettling to those in power. What he had displayed moments ago, she continued, was far beyond ordinary. She revealed that he had unconsciously cast a 2-star spell, auditory hallucination. As her words settled, a familiar translucent system panel appeared before his eyes, confirming that at the age of 14 he had officially advanced to a 2-star mage. From that day forward, Quasar remained by his side, traveling together and teaching him several additional spells. Time flowed steadily, and a year passed before she received an offer she could not decline. She was appointed as a private instructor to the ruling family of Elvester County, an influential noble house. Such a position was considered a rare honor, one that most mages would never encounter in their lifetime. Before departing, she entrusted him with a 2-star spellbook as a parting gift. Left alone in his room, the boy studied the book carefully, treating it as both a lesson and a reminder. Another year slipped by, during which he independently mastered 2 more 2-star spells. Now 16, his ambition remained unshaken. If anything, his resolve only deepened. One evening at the tavern, the manager excitedly called out his name, barely able to contain himself. He claimed to have finally secured a lucrative request. Curious, the boy asked for details. Grinning from ear to ear, the manager revealed that the commission came from House Duplain of the Grand Duchy. The boy was immediately taken aback. He questioned why such a powerful noble house would seek help from a modest tavern operation. The manager, however, was thrilled beyond reason. House Duplain was infamous for its wealth, spending gold without restraint. Grabbing the boy's arm, he insisted this was a rare chance to establish valuable connections. Unmoved, the young mage simply asked what the job involved. The manager explained that the task was straightforward, eliminating monsters within their territory. The simplicity of the explanation only made the boy more suspicious. For a family of that stature, such a request made no sense. Without hesitation, he declined the job and told the manager to find someone else. As he headed for the exit, he calmly stated that he avoided assignments that felt off. The manager hurried after him, clearly desperate. He argued that the request specifically required a mage, and mages were scarce. He insisted that the boy was the only viable candidate. Even then, the young mage prepared to refuse again, unwilling to invite unnecessary danger. That was when the manager placed a gold coin into his hand as an advance. Faced with the weight of real gold, the boy paused, then accepted both the payment and the questionable commission. Not long after, he met the clients, a trio shrouded in mystery. As the manager began the introductions, the man wearing a monocle immediately dismissed him. The client scoffed, stating that he had expected someone more capable, not a child. The manager rushed to defend him, claiming that the boy was the most skilled mage he knew. The man paid no attention. Turning away, he declared that the task was unsuitable for someone so young and prepared to leave, whispering something to his companion. At that moment, the cloaked figure among the 3 stepped forward. Their presence alone carried an undeniable pressure. The hooded stranger finally spoke, calling Derrick by name and insisting they speak in private. Before any answers could be given, the scene shifted far away to the Grand Duchy of Duplain, a land blanketed by endless forests. There, the mission was already underway. The young mercenary had accepted the request and was locked in combat with a goblin. His crimson eyes burned with sharp focus as he read every movement of his enemy. Steel flashed. With a clean, decisive strike, he cut the creature down, his swordsmanship precise and efficient. He barely had a moment to steady his breathing before another goblin, larger and far more ferocious, charged forward, roaring as it swung a heavy axe. Reacting instantly, he twisted his body aside, narrowly avoiding the deadly blow. His feet slid across the forest floor as he prepared to retaliate. The clash ended quickly. When silence returned, the boy stood over the fallen body, dirt and blood clinging to his clothes. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and released a violent surge of lightning. The spell tore through the forest, erasing the remaining goblins in one devastating sweep. Exhausted, he reported back to the dispatch officer, stating calmly that the task had been completed. The 3 clients who had hired him exchanged unimpressed looks, clearly underwhelmed by the sight of such a young mercenary. Only the cloaked individual seemed pleased, smiling faintly as they remarked on how swiftly the goblins had been eliminated. Later that night, the streets around Belden's Tier Tavern buzzed with noise and activity. Inside, a blonde girl named Pelin was shouting angrily at the young man. The tavern manager struggled to restrain her as she accused him of degrading himself by serving nobles. Leaning close, the manager muttered that Derrick had never mentioned the payment details to her. Raising one finger, the man let the silence stretch. Pelin scoffed, assuming the advance was no more than a single silver coin. The manager's smug grin told her otherwise. When he revealed that the upfront payment was actually 1 gold coin, her reaction was immediate, pure shock. The excitement overwhelmed her. Bursting with enthusiasm, she declared she wanted to take the job too. Moments later, she collapsed from sheer joy. Once things settled, the manager asked about the mission. The boy shrugged and replied that it had been simple, just goblins. However, he added something unexpected. Despite their appearance, the clients hadn't been entirely honest. The manager blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Taking a slow drink, the boy explained that the so-called noble lacked 3 key traits expected of his rank. As for the maid, she was clearly pretending. Her hands had been far too clean, untouched by the kind of labor servants endured daily. Before he could mention the third inconsistency, the manager interrupted, calling his name sharply. The boy fell silent, listening as the man reminded him of an important truth. Mercenaries weren't paid to question motives. Their job was to survive, complete the task, and collect the reward. The young mercenary accepted that reasoning without argument. The following day, they returned to Duplain to conclude the job officially. Derrick reported that the goblin threat had been dealt with and wouldn't resurface anytime soon. The client praised his work and handed over the remaining payment, 2 gleaming gold coins. The manager nearly lost control, cheering loudly as he grabbed the coins and ruffled Derrick's hair in delight. The noble cleared his throat, bringing their attention back. He then expressed interest in making another request, leaving the manager stunned. When the payment was revealed, 15 gold coins, the man froze in disbelief. Faced with the offer, the noble asked directly if Derrick would accept. The young mage met his gaze and agreed without hesitation. They soon departed in a lavish carriage, traveling toward the next destination. Upon arrival, they found themselves before the grand estate of the Grand Duchy of Duplain. The mansion's sheer size left the manager speechless. Before entering, the noble insisted on formal introductions, despite the manager thinking it unnecessary. The man revealed himself as Dylan, the head butler serving the Grand Duke. Panic instantly overtook the manager. Shortly after, the woman stepped forward and introduced herself as Katerina, the estate's head housekeeper. Finally, the cloaked individual removed any doubt, revealing his identity as Jaden, captain of the Belden mercenaries. Only then did the young mercenary realize the truth. They had all concealed their real status, each holding far more authority than they had claimed. As Katerina led them into the massive residence, the manager finally understood just how significant their client truly was. The cloaked figure slowly lifted their hood. Derrick remained silent, watching closely as the hidden face was finally revealed. It was a young woman. Calm and composed, she introduced herself as Aline Duplain. Without hesitation, she explained her purpose. She wished to hire him as a tutor for her younger sister, Daila. The request left Derrick stunned. Teaching magic to a noble's daughter was far beyond anything he had expected. The scene shifted deeper into the Duplain family mansion, a vast estate that radiated authority and history. Suddenly, the heavy door of an office burst open with a violent crash. A young man named Rigg stormed inside, dragging a trembling servant girl by her hair. His anger filled the room as he confronted his father and his older brother, Valerian. The man seated at the desk ordered Rigg to calm himself and behave with some dignity. Rigg snapped back, shouting that dignity was the last thing Della understood. The maid he was dragging sobbed uncontrollably, clearly injured and terrified. Valerian cut in sharply, demanding that his brother lower his voice since they were in the middle of an important discussion. Rigg ignored the warning. He snarled that more than 10 servants had quit within the past month and demanded to know how long their father intended to tolerate Della's behavior. Valerian finally stood up and shouted his brother's name, ordering him to stop. He told Rigg to end the disturbance and leave at once. Rigg refused, glaring at his father with open disdain. Valerian reminded him that even if Della was problematic, they still had their sister Aline. Rigg scoffed and coldly suggested it was time to dispose of the girl entirely. His father's voice hardened immediately, warning that such a decision was not Rigg's to make. Unwilling to back down, Rigg argued that sending Della to a distant monastery would solve everything. In a flash of fury, their father seized Rigg by the collar and slammed his head into the wooden desk with overwhelming strength. Despite his injuries, Rigg was ordered to stay silent and remember his place. As he staggered out of the room, Rigg muttered that one day his father would be forced to choose. The Grand Duke watched him leave, his expression grim and troubled. Back in the present, Aline guided Derrick through the mansion's long, echoing corridors. She asked if he recognized the name Della. He replied that he had seen it listed in the family records. Aline smiled faintly and explained that her sister rarely appeared in public. They stopped before an enormous, ornately carved door. At that moment, Valerian emerged from the office, supporting Rig, whose face was badly bruised. Valerian greeted Aline warmly and asked about her time in Ibelstein. She replied that thanks to his concern, she had been living comfortably. Valerian excused himself, saying Rig needed attention, and led his brother away. Derrick watched the exchange silently, his red eyes faintly glowing as he processed what he had seen. As they passed, he noticed the same maid from earlier, crouched in the corner of the hallway, crying softly. Only then did the weight of the situation surrounding Della truly settle in his mind. Soon after, Aline and Derrick sat down to formally discuss the arrangement. She thanked her father and introduced Derrick as the tutor who would oversee Della's education. The Grand Duke studied the young mage carefully, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Aline excused herself, sensing her father was busy, and guided Derrick toward the exit. Just before they could leave, the Grand Duke spoke, instructing Derrick to stay behind. The boy turned back calmly, meeting the man's serious gaze. Sunlight poured through the tall office windows as the Grand Duke continued writing on a scroll with precise, elegant strokes. Without looking up, he remarked on how young Derrick appeared and questioned whether he was truly 16. Seated comfortably across from him, Derrick answered without hesitation, confirming his age. The quiet tension in the room made it clear that this conversation was only just beginning. The Grand Duke studied the young man for a moment before asking whether he could use magic at all. Derrick answered calmly, stating that he was capable of casting one-star spells. A brief laugh escaped the noble, amused by the predictability of the response. However, his expression quickly hardened. He warned that humility was not always interpreted as a virtue, especially in certain circles. Derrick understood the implication immediately and chose to remain quiet. As he assessed the situation, he realized that modesty would hold little value in front of a 5-star mage. He apologized if his words had sounded disrespectful, but the Grand Duke waved it off, saying he understood the reason behind the boy's attitude. The noble remarked that judging by his age and worn clothing, Derrick hardly resembled a magic instructor. A faint smile appeared on the boy's face as he clarified that he was, in fact, a mercenary. That answer seemed to satisfy the Grand Duke, who decided not to pry further. He granted Derrick permission to stay in the mansion's annex and instructed a maid to escort him. Before leaving, however, Derrick asked to speak once more. The Grand Duke paused and allowed him to continue, giving him his full attention. Derrick explained that as a mercenary he was bound to complete any mission he accepted. Aline had hired him so that Diala could learn magic and gain the refinement needed to enter high society. The explanation seemed obvious to the noble, who asked why the boy felt the need to state it aloud. Meeting his gaze with seriousness, Derrick admitted that he had a personal request to make. The Grand Duke frowned slightly, confused by the sudden turn of the conversation. The scene abruptly shifted. A porcelain plate flew across a lavish room, smashing violently against the wall. Shards scattered as a maid cried out in terror. Trembling, she apologized to Della, but the girl coldly replied that apologies were meaningless. Enraged, she threatened the servant and ordered her out of her sight at once. Elsewhere, Jaden spoke quietly with Aline, questioning her choice of tutor. He pointed out that a commoner would struggle to teach a noble, especially when they had access to better options. Aline explained that she had already tried the most renowned mages, but each of them had quit. That was why she chose a different approach. Jaden noted that Derrick's former master had been a noble, meaning he had at least been exposed to aristocratic culture. Aline agreed, adding that the boy appeared composed and refined enough to guide Diala. With a knowing smile, Jaden advised her to sharpen her ability to judge people. He revealed that Derrick had grown up on the streets and became a mercenary at a very young age. Aline listened carefully, her expression turning thoughtful. The scene shifted again. Derrick was led through the mansion's long corridors by Dylan and a maid. They stopped before an enormous door that seemed to loom over him. Sensing the gravity of what awaited him inside, he raised his hand and knocked firmly. He waited calmly, but no answer came. After a brief pause, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. With a steady voice, he offered a simple greeting. Introducing himself, Derrick addressed Diala and politely asked for a moment alone so they could speak. Without turning around, the girl ordered the boy to come closer. Derrick complied, stepping forward at a measured pace. As the distance between them closed, a sly curve formed on Della's lips. In the next instant, she flung the contents of a cup straight at his face. The liquid splashed into his hair and ran down his cheeks, dripping slowly onto the floor. She smiled cruelly, remarking that she had mistaken him for a sewer creature invading her room. Repeating the insult, she asked if he was the mercenary the butler had mentioned. Resting lazily against a chair, she continued to stare at him with open disdain. Then, climbing onto a small table to loom over him, she grabbed a bucket and dumped its foul contents over his head. Filthy water poured down his clothes, soaking him completely. Derrick didn't move. He stood there silently as the water slid off him. Della clicked her tongue, complaining that the bucket was empty and that the humiliation hadn't been as satisfying as she'd hoped. That was when Derrick slowly raised his head. His eyes burned with restrained fury. The sudden shift startled her. Shock flashed across her face before she lashed out, attempting to kick him. He reacted instantly, catching her foot midair with ease. Losing balance atop the table, she flailed helplessly before crashing onto the floor. Grimacing, she covered her nose and complained about the stench. One of her shoes slipped off and landed against Derrick's shoulder. He remained where he was, watching her calmly. Using the table to steady herself, Della stood back up and sneered, calling him a sewer rat once more. She questioned how someone like him could ever teach her. The scene briefly shifted. The Grand Duke stood by a window, gazing outside as he considered Derrick's earlier request. The boy had said plainly that his presence meant Della's issue wasn't simple. He asked how much authority the Duke was truly willing to grant him. The noble had answered only with silence, his sharp eyes weighing the implications. Back in the present, Della remained on the floor, her face flushed, eyes wide with disbelief. Derrick looked down at her, his expression unreadable. She followed his every movement, fear creeping into her gaze. In a low, commanding voice, he ordered her to stand up immediately. No protests. The memory shifted again. 3 years earlier, Derrick sat on a cart beside Quasar, asking how she would handle a defiant student. She answered calmly, saying she would try to understand them first, to guide them with patience. He found the idea naive and asked what should be done if that failed. Quasar replied that teaching was about direction, and when understanding failed, another method was required. Her tone darkened as she revealed the alternative, instilling fear. The present returned. Della was still frozen on the floor. Derrick repeated his demand, telling her to show respect and stand without forcing him to repeat himself. She began to rise, rage etched across her face. Halfway up, she screamed and threw a punch at him. Derrick moved faster. His hand struck her face cleanly. Coldly, he warned her that he would not repeat his instructions and that she would learn to treat others properly. Stunned, Della stared at him, disbelief twisting into fury. She screamed for the butler, shouting that a commoner had dared to touch her. Moments later, Dylan burst into the room with 2 maids, demanding to know what had happened. He turned on Derrick, furious, asking what he thought he was doing. Calm as ever, Derrick produced a scroll and handed it over. He stated that the Grand Duke had granted him full authority over Della's education. Dylan's expression drained as he examined the seal with his monocle. Della froze, realization finally sinking in. That night, moonlight bathed the massive Duplain estate. In the corridors, Valerian stormed ahead while Rig struggled to restrain him. Valerian burst into a room and demanded to know if Derrick was the mercenary in question. The boy looked up from his book in silence. Enraged, Valerian lunged forward, accusing him of striking his sister. Derrick calmly replied that the Grand Duke himself had approved his actions. Rig reminded Valerian that both Aline and their father had sanctioned it. Valerian snapped at Rig to stay out of it and ordered Derrick to follow him elsewhere. Rig smirked, remarking that Della needed a lesson and that Valerian wouldn't go too far. Derrick watched them leave without comment. Rig scoffed, questioning why his brother continued to protect such a hopeless girl. The scene faded to the image of a much younger Della, small, frightened, and utterly alone. Back in the present, Valerian led Derrick to a closed door and gestured for him to enter. He explained quietly that this had once been Della's room, left exactly as it was since her removal. The space felt frozen in time. Derrick's attention was drawn to an easel near the window. A half-finished painting rested there, its colors vivid yet incomplete. Valerian spoke softly, revealing that his sister had loved drawing. She would eagerly call him over to show her work, her eyes shining with excitement. Yet she never completed her paintings, only filling in the parts that pleased her most, abandoning the rest. After a pause, Valerian apologized for losing his temper earlier. Derrick dismissed it calmly, then asked why he had been brought into a room filled with unfinished art. Valerian's expression darkened. He said Della had never deserved ridicule, but she became consumed by the family's obsession with bloodlines. That fixation eventually led to her expulsion from the main residence and confinement within the annex. His voice wavered as he admitted that if she could even learn one-star magic, he might persuade their father to reconsider. Gripping Derrick's sleeves tightly, Valerian begged him to help his sister. Derrick stopped him and asked for a moment to think. He pointed out that Della hadn't truly abandoned magic. The books she owned were filled with handwritten notes. He asked if those tomes came from the School of Regulations, and Valerian confirmed it immediately. A realization settled over Derrick's face. Another unfinished painting caught his eye, this one depicting a forest, vibrant yet incomplete. Holding one of the magic books, his gaze hardened with resolve. He handed the book back and said simply that he would try. Night fell over the massive Duplain estate. In the annex, Della slept unaware until icy water crashed over her without warning. She jolted awake, screaming, soaked to the bone. Standing over her, Derrick smiled faintly and asked if she truly thought this was the time to sleep. Furious, she shouted that he had lost his mind, demanding to know how he dared enter her room. Ignoring her protests, he seized her arm and told her they were going somewhere important. She screamed for help as he dragged her through the corridors, but no one came. Unbothered, Derrick pulled her beyond the mansion walls and toward the shadowed forest. Once there, he shoved her to the ground. Pain shot through her as she cried out. She yelled that he was delusional if he thought this cruelty could teach her anything. Derrick replied calmly that she never listened and asked if she wanted to hear something interesting. A chilling smile crossed his face as he confessed that he took pleasure in putting arrogant nobles in their place. Fear overtook her. She demanded to know what he meant. He leaned closer, whispering that the tutoring arrangement was merely an excuse to get close enough to break people like her. Drawing his sword, he remarked coldly on how beautiful noble screams sounded. Backing away in terror, Della demanded to know if he thought he would escape punishment. Sword in hand, Derrick reminded her that she was destined for a monastery and that no one would believe her story. If something happened, he said, he could simply pay with his life, doing her family a favor by removing her. Panic seized her. Realizing she would die if she stayed, Della scrambled to her feet and fled into the forest. She knew the terrain well enough to lose him, and if she could return to the mansion, she believed he would be the one destroyed. Then she felt it. A wave of heat surged behind her. Flames gathered in the darkness as a massive fireball formed midair. Without hesitation, Derrick released the spell toward her. Della glanced back in horror, recognizing the magic instantly. A 2-star fire spell. Impossible, for a mere commoner. Despair flooded her eyes as Derrick watched calmly, a cruel smile on his face. The fireball struck the ground just behind her, the heat rushing forward like a living beast. She screamed as the explosion erupted, the shockwave hurling her through the air and slamming her into the forest floor. Collapsed against the cold forest floor, Della struggled to swallow as fear crushed her chest. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Footsteps approached, unhurried. When she looked up, Derrick was already there, wearing a faint smile as he remarked that his spell seemed to have missed. She forced herself upright and ran again, lungs burning as branches scraped her skin. Hatred twisted her expression as she glanced back, refusing to let terror be the last thing she showed him. But her strength failed her. Her foot caught on an exposed root, and she crashed hard onto the ground, every muscle screaming in protest. She tried to rise, but froze. An icy blade hovered inches from her face, radiating cold light that pierced the darkness. The glowing ice arrow hummed with lethal intent. Her breath caught as it shot past her cheek and embedded itself into the earth ahead, frost spreading across the soil. Della couldn't move. Derrick calmly praised her speed, remarking that it was impressive for someone confined to the annex. She gasped for air, staring at him in pure terror. Still refusing to surrender, she dragged herself upright and fled once more into the forest. He didn't chase her. He simply watched, a small curve at the corner of his lips, as she ran on borrowed strength. Panic consumed her. She knew she couldn't keep this up. Every direction felt the same. Every shadow threatened to swallow her. Derrick knelt and pressed his hand to the ground. A faint glow spread as a tracking spell activated. When he lifted his gaze, her path was already clear to him. As he followed, something clicked. This forest, its rhythm, its silence, matched the unfinished paintings he had seen. He finally understood. She hadn't merely painted scenery. She had poured her connection to this place onto canvas, capturing emotion rather than form. Her potential had always been there. Cornered at last, Della screamed and hurled a stone at him with all the strength she had left. Derrick didn't flinch. In one smooth motion, his blade flashed, splitting the rock cleanly in two. Her eyes widened in shock. He acknowledged her resolve, noting that she chose to fight instead of continuing to run. But her legs gave out. She collapsed, utterly drained. Derrick stepped closer, pointing out that she had no strength left. His sword lowered toward her as he asked if she had any final words. She laughed, bitter and broken, and met his gaze with open defiance. She said she would never apologize and dared him to finish it. Instead, he asked her why she clung so desperately to bloodline superiority. Silence followed. Tears welled in her eyes as the question sank in. At last, she whispered that without her bloodline, she had nothing. The words cracked her voice apart. Suddenly, she screamed, repeating the word magic again and again, rage and despair tearing through her. She demanded to know if he thought she had never tried. Derrick said nothing. She sobbed that no matter how hard she worked, it never mattered. With tears streaming down her face, Della stared at the ground, asking herself what she had left, if her bloodline was all she had ever been allowed to hold on to. Della's voice faltered as she questioned who she truly was, her words dissolving into the night air. Derrick did not answer. He simply stood there, watching, allowing silence to stretch between them. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he was weighing something unseen. Then, a soft blue glow gathered along the edge of his blade. Della lifted her tear-streaked face, confusion and fear colliding in her eyes as she tried to read his intent. Derrick raised his sword and spoke coldly, saying he had listened to enough of her self-pity for one night. His tone carried no warmth as he offered his farewell. Panic struck instantly. Without hesitation, he brought the blade down with full force. Della shut her eyes tight, bracing for the end. Her body tensed, waiting for pain that never came. Seconds passed. When she dared to open her eyes, she froze in disbelief. A towering wall of jagged ice crystals stood before her, shimmering faintly in the darkness. She stared at it, breath caught in her throat. On the opposite side of the frozen barrier, Derrick stood calmly, watching her reaction. At that moment, Della felt a strange sensation surge through her arms. She looked down as her hands began to glow with a faint blue light. She had done it. Her mana had responded. Derrick smoothly returned his sword to its sheath and offered her a quiet congratulation, followed by an apology for his earlier harshness. Della could only stare, her mind struggling to keep up with what had just happened. He explained that what she experienced was merely mana manifestation, but the fact that she achieved it at all mattered. The realization broke her composure completely. Tears streamed freely as she laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by joy. She shouted in relief, celebrating the fact that she had finally used magic, even if only a trace. Derrick remained nearby, allowing her to release everything she had bottled up for so long. Once she calmed, he told her that she belonged to the school of the wild. The statement left her stunned. He went on to explain that most nobles are taught through the school of regulation, which was why she had always struggled. For her, forcing that system was like wearing clothes that were never meant to fit. Della asked how he had known so quickly. With a faint smile, Derrick said he had seen her paintings and felt the mana embedded within them. He explained that mages of the wild resonate with nature instinctively, often expressing it long before they realize what it is. Understanding dawned across her face. He rose to his feet and told her that was enough for one night. While she had awakened her mana, her journey was only beginning. As he turned to leave, Della called his name. He paused and faced her. Embarrassed, arms folded tightly, she thanked him in a small voice. Derrick hesitated, unsure how to respond, then simply told her it was time to go. Together, they headed back toward the mansion. Along the way, he remarked on one of her paintings. She quietly admitted it was her finest work. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room, marking the start of something new. Della woke in her bed feeling different, steadier, more focused. With renewed determination, she raised her hand and closed her eyes, carefully attempting to call forth her mana once again. Della fixed her gaze on her outstretched hand, brow furrowed in concentration. She tried to guide the unfamiliar energy coursing inside her body, but the moment she attempted to shape it, the power slipped away like mist. The faint glow vanished, leaving her staring at her palm in frustration. Even now, controlling mana felt far more difficult than she had imagined. Outside her room, a maid approached with a laundry basket balanced against her hip. At that moment, the door flew open without warning. The servant shrieked in shock, stumbling backward. The bucket she carried tipped over, and murky water spilled across the floor, splashing over Della's bare feet. The young noble did not move. Trembling, the maid dropped to her knees and apologized over and over, her voice shaking with fear. She fully expected punishment, just as before. Della stared at her in silence, her expression dark and unreadable. The pause stretched long enough for the servant to panic further, pressing her forehead to the floor as she begged for mercy. Then, calmly, Della spoke. "Be more careful next time." Without another word, she turned and walked away. The maid remained frozen on the floor, stunned. She couldn't understand it. There was no slap, no shouting, no cruelty. Other servants soon gathered, whispering in disbelief when they learned that the young noble had let her go with only a warning. Elsewhere in the mansion, Derrick slept soundly, completely unaware of the uproar. That peace shattered when loud knocking echoed through his door, accompanied by someone calling his name. Groggy, he sat up and rubbed his eyes, still trying to process what was happening. Before he could respond, the door burst open. Della stormed in with Dylan close behind her and demanded that Derrick teach her how to control her mana. Dylan stared at her in shock, struggling to believe that she had actually succeeded in manifesting magic. Della ignored his reaction entirely and fixed her gaze on Derrick, repeating her demand. Clearly uninterested in arguing so early in the morning, Derrick told her to return in the afternoon. Then, without further explanation, he shut the door. Dylan stood there, overwhelmed by emotion at the change he had witnessed in Della. She, however, was far from moved. Anger flared instantly. She pounded on the door, shouting for Derrick to come back and teach her immediately. The only response she received was silence as he returned to sleep, leaving her fuming in the hallway. By afternoon, sunlight bathed the massive Duplain mansion in warmth. Through its long corridors, footsteps echoed with purpose. Two maids whispered nearby, gossiping about how Della hadn't broken anything that day. One of them added in a hushed voice that the young noble had even awakened her magic. Rieg, passing by, stopped short when he overheard them. His eyes widened as he turned sharply toward the servants, demanding they repeat what they had just said. Meanwhile, in his office, the Grand Duke calmly continued writing until Icelandine informed him of the news. According to the servants, Della had indeed manifested magic. The man finally relaxed, a trace of relief crossing his features. Ra, however, warned against celebrating too soon. Manifesting mana alone proved nothing. Ace Lion bristled at her words, snapping that their sister deserved praise for even reaching this point. Their father listened quietly as the argument unfolded, his expression unreadable. Rieg reminded them of Della's past behavior and insisted that this alone was not enough to spare her from being sent to the convent. The Grand Duke said nothing, clearly weighing his next decision. Back in her room, Della sat with her back turned, arms crossed, sulking. Derrick approached and asked if she was angry because he had shut the door on her earlier. Without facing him, she replied that she wasn't upset. She was furious. He warned her that throwing a tantrum would not change the situation. Della snapped back that she wasn't being stubborn, just angry. Calmly, Derrick explained that rushing things would only make matters worse and that progress required patience and proper order. Finally losing her temper, Della spun around and shouted that she had already said she was angry, not sulking. Derrick said nothing. He simply looked at her, his silence heavier than any scolding. Realizing it wasn't working, she sighed and muttered that fine. If he insisted, then she was pouting. That finally prompted a reaction. Derrick leaned against the chair and began explaining. Just because she had awakened mana didn't mean she was ready to wield it freely. Della yawned and complained that he sounded like a rigid, overly serious instructor. His expression darkened. He asked if she would prefer a less by-the-book method. Instantly, memories of the forest and his terrifying presence flooded her mind. Her posture straightened, fear wiping away her attitude in an instant. She quickly apologized, telling him to forget what she said and continue the lesson properly. Derrick nodded, and the lesson finally began. Derrick began the lesson by stating their goal clearly. They would focus on manifesting magic. He explained that the School of the Wild followed no rigid formulas. Instead of rules, it valued instinct, freedom, and harmony with one's natural disposition. As he spoke, he added that this approach suited Della perfectly. The words caught her off guard. He went on to say that her temperament aligned naturally with the wild path, and combined with her noble bloodline, it gave her a strong foundation. Della froze for a moment before her cheeks flushed. She hesitated, then asked if he truly believed she was talented. When he confirmed it calmly, her excitement exploded. She jumped to her feet, eyes shining, and eagerly asked if that meant she was some kind of prodigy. The conversation quickly spiraled into a heated back and forth over whether talent alone qualified someone as a magic genius. Outside the room, Rieg overheard their voices through the door. His expression darkened as he listened. After a brief pause, he clicked his tongue in irritation and walked away, clearly troubled by his sister's rapid progress. The following days passed in a blur of relentless training within the Duplain mansion. Della barged into Derrick's room one morning, proudly declaring that she could summon mana but still struggled to guide it properly. On another occasion, she interrupted him during lunch just to demonstrate her newly awakened cold-type magic. Day after day, she dragged him aside at every opportunity, eager to show how much she had improved. One afternoon, she spotted him sitting beneath a tree, quietly reading. Furious, she stormed over and accused him of abandoning her training after ordering her to remain in the annex. Without the slightest hint of guilt, Derrick replied that this was exactly why he had brought the books. Unconvinced, Della declared that she had finally managed to make her mana flow properly and immediately grabbed him, insisting he witness her progress. Elsewhere in the mansion, Valerian stood by a window, waiting. When the door finally opened and Derrick entered, the noble invited him to sit. Once settled, Valerian asked about Della's advancement. Derrick answered honestly. She had made impressive strides, but mastering even a single star spell would take time. Valerian nodded, then mentioned that their mother would return from a meeting the following week. He warned Derrick that she was difficult to handle and that nobles generally disapproved of commoners occupying significant roles. Derrick acknowledged the warning and asked if that was the reason he had been summoned. Valerian fell silent, clearly choosing his words carefully. He then revealed that he would soon become the head of House Duplain and that such a position carried immense responsibility. He spoke about sincerity, appearances, and how complicated people's hearts could be. Losing patience, Derrick cut in and asked him to get to the point. Clenching his fist, Valerian finally confessed the real issue. In a petulant tone, he complained that Della no longer wanted to spend time with him. Derrick stared at him blankly, unsure how to respond. Valerian reminisced about their childhood, recalling how she used to greet him with a bright smile. Now, she only followed Derrick around, ignoring everyone else. Desperate, he begged for advice on how to regain her attention. As proof of his effort, he pulled out a doll he had learned to make from the maids, proudly asking if it resembled Della. Derrick eyed it darkly and asked if he was attempting some kind of curse. Offended, Valerian began to whine, then finally gave up, declaring Derrick completely useless for emotional matters. Not long after, Derrick encountered Lady Duplain alongside her servants. Wearing a pleasant smile, she remarked that she had heard they had found a remarkably capable magic tutor. Introducing herself formally, she offered a gift from her territory as a gesture of goodwill. Derrick refused immediately, stating that he was not affiliated with any noble house. Confused, Mela asked what he meant. With a calm but firm expression, he replied that he was merely a commoner. The revelation left her stunned. The narrative then flashed back to a week earlier at the mansion gates. Aline thanked Derrick for accepting the responsibility of caring for her sister. With a gentle smile, she explained that she needed to return to Ebelstein and would leave Della in his care. Derrick confirmed his understanding. The tavern manager nearby joked that his reply sounded far too lifeless and warned him to settle things quickly, as Pelin would surely complain otherwise. Derrick simply watched as the carriage disappeared down the road. Moments later, Aline suddenly panicked, realizing she had forgotten something important. Her mother would be returning the following week. Derrick didn't understand why this mattered until Aline described her mother as a walking embodiment of fury. Back in the present, Mela's voice echoed through the mansion as she berated her husband over their daughter's commoner tutor. Calmly, the Grand Duke asked her to lower her voice. She ignored him, insisting that the real issue was Della herself. The Duke admitted that he also disliked assigning such roles to commoners, but reminded her that every noble tutor they hired had resigned. In the end, he emphasized one key fact: it was Aline who had recommended Derrick. Despite everything, Mela refused to back down. She argued that House Duplain had to uphold its prestige and suggested that her younger brother, Flam, take over as Della's tutor. The idea made the Grand Duke frown immediately. Pulling Flam away from his responsibilities for private instruction struck him as unreasonable. Mela, however, exploded. She claimed that social standing was its own battlefield, one that required constant strategy. Pointing sharply at her husband, she declared that their daughter would become the laughingstock of noble society if she continued studying under a nameless commoner. Valerian stepped forward, urging his mother to calm herself and stop arguing with their father. She ignored him completely and ordered him to leave, insisting the issue was far too serious for interference. Rig then spoke up, redirecting the argument. He remarked that the real question wasn't status, but whether the commoner actually possessed the ability to teach. Mela smiled at his words, clearly pleased, while Valerian's worry deepened. Rig continued, saying that although a commoner instructing a noble was unusual, it could be tolerated if the tutor proved his worth. He proposed testing Derrick through a magic duel. The Grand Duke immediately shut the idea down, warning his son that Derrick was a genuine mage. Rig scowled, irritated at being contradicted. Unwilling to concede, he suggested a different approach, testing Della instead. Valerian stared at him, baffled. Rig explained calmly that if Derrick truly was a competent teacher, then Della's improvement would speak for itself. The Grand Duke remained silent, clearly weighing the idea. Valerian tried to object, but Rig was already walking away, intent on carrying out his plan. As they left the room, Valerian demanded to know if his brother had lost his mind, proposing such a thing for their sister. Rig countered that Della had changed and reminded him of the trouble she had caused in the past. Valerian insisted she was their only sister and needed protection no matter what. Rig laughed bitterly and asked if he truly believed in that cursed bloodline rhetoric. He shouted that the same blood had nearly destroyed their family countless times. Valerian froze, stunned by the venom in his brother's words. Rig coldly declared that Della's best fate was remaining locked away in the annex forever before leaving. Left alone in the hallway, Valerian watched him go, his face tight with resolve as an unspoken plan began forming in his mind. Later that day, birds chirped calmly near the mansion grounds. The peace shattered when Della stormed into Derrick's room, her eyes blazing with excitement. He glanced up at her with clear impatience and asked what she wanted so early. A scroll slammed down onto the book he was reading. Arms crossed, she warned him bluntly. If she lost the upcoming duel, he was fired. Derrick read the document and pointed out calmly that Rig was already a seasoned one-star mage, making victory unlikely. Della erupted, shouting that if she lost, he would pay the price. Unbothered, Derrick replied with a faint smile that he was a mercenary, hired to do a job and nothing more. He added that he had already been paid well beyond what he expected. The words stunned her. She demanded to know if he truly didn't care about being dismissed. He didn't answer. His silence was enough. A week passed quickly, and the day of the duel finally arrived. An outdoor arena buzzed with anticipation as members of House Duplain and their servants gathered. The Grand Duke and Mela entered with commanding presence. When the Duke spotted Derrick already waiting on the battlefield, the young mage bowed respectfully, his expression calm and unreadable. The Duke studied him closely, noting the complete absence of nerves. Taking his seat, he decided it wasn't yet time to discard such a composed tutor. Soon after, Rig stepped into the arena, his movements deliberate, his expression cold. He announced that this would not be a mere test. He intended to crush Della completely and make her regret every mistake she had ever made. Moments later, Della entered the field, cloaked in a hood, her face set with determination. Her thoughts drifted back to a previous conversation. She had asked Derrick whether he truly didn't care what happened to her. He told her that her magical growth was already moving in the right direction. Confused and tearful, she questioned why he kept bringing up the Duplain bloodline. He reminded her that the School of the Wild emphasized self-discovery over rigid instruction. Desperate, she demanded to know why he was saying such things now. He offered no answer. Lowering her head, Della admitted she wasn't an ideal student. Still, she begged him not to abandon her. She didn't want another tutor. Derrick listened in silence, his back turned. After a long pause, he admitted he knew nothing about noble duel etiquette. He had never fought under such rules. Memories surfaced. Della's life under constant judgment, whispered criticism, and disappointed stares. Derrick said he could teach her how to win if that was truly what she wanted. Images of her past failures flooded her mind. Tears streamed down her face as she agreed and asked him to make her victorious. That was why she stepped into the arena, not as Rig's younger sister, and not as the youngest of House Duplain. Derrick understood. She stood there simply as a mage, and as his student, ready to fight. The battlefield fell silent as Daila stood at the front of the sparring ground, her posture steady but tense. The butler stepped forward and announced calmly, "We will apply the sparring rules of high-rank mages. Whichever side triggers General Salem's protective magic circle first will be declared the loser. With that, the match will begin." At his words, Daila lifted her gaze. Her eyes met Rig's. For a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow to that single exchange. Rig's expression was controlled, but there was something sharp lurking behind his gaze, an intent that made Daila's instincts flare with warning. The signal was given. Almost instantly, a magic pendant embedded near the platform's edge activated. A faint, shimmering light spread outward like ripples across water. Invisible lines traced themselves through the air, forming General Salem's phantom protective magic circle. It was an advanced construct, designed to nullify lethal damage and forcibly suppress spells before they could cause fatal harm. From the sidelines, Derrick watched with narrowed eyes. So this is how nobles spar, he thought coldly. Expensive accessories just to avoid injuries. His gaze flicked briefly to the pendant, then back to the battlefield. It must be convenient to be rich enough to throw money away like this. The sparring duration had been set at 10 minutes. However, the moment Derrick observed Rig's stance, he knew the match would not last nearly that long. Rig had no intention of dragging this out. Rig raised one hand. Dense purple mana gathered around his palm as he began chanting. The energy twisted violently, compressing into a sharp, unstable mass that crackled with pressure. The air itself seemed to vibrate under its weight. Daila looked up, her brows knitting together as the oppressive force washed over her. The raw intensity of the mana made her chest tighten. Raig's eyes hardened. Purple light erupted as the energy took form. Sorry, he thought coldly, but I need you back in the annex. He lunged forward without warning, shouting her name as he swung his arm down. A sharp slash of condensed energy tore through the air, screaming as it raced straight toward her. Daila's eyes flashed. At the very last instant, she activated her ability and slipped aside. The attack grazed past her, missing by a hair's breadth before slamming into the ground behind her. Raig clicked his tongue, teeth grinding together. How dare she? He didn't hesitate. Another attack followed immediately, then another. Daila retreated, maintaining distance while keeping her focus locked firmly on his movements. Each step was precise, calculated. She refused to let herself panic. From the sidelines, Derrick observed every exchange with a critical eye. She's handling one-star magic without trouble, he assessed. But when it comes to real combat, she's still inexperienced. His gaze sharpened. She's forcing the spell's trajectory instead of guiding it. At this rate, she'll burn through her mana quickly. A violent clash erupted as Raig's aggressive magic slammed into Daila's barrier. The mana shield flared brightly, rippling as sharp energy collided against its surface. The impact sent vibrations through her arms. Raig scoffed. She's not even using star-rank magic, he sneered. It's just raw mana manifestation. Does she really think she can block me with something like this? Purple light surged again. This time, 3 condensed spheres of energy formed in his hand, each one pulsing with unstable power. His aura intensified, pressing down on the battlefield like a storm. If it's just a trick, Raig said coldly, I'll break through it with pure firepower. Try blocking this, Daila. Inside the barrier, Daila lifted her gaze. The mass of energy looming above her felt overwhelming, as if it could swallow her whole. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Suddenly, Derrick's voice echoed in her memory. Remember this, Lady Daila. She could see him clearly, standing tall, eyes sharp, expression unwavering. Mercenaries don't fight like nobles, he had said. They don't believe in fairness or honor during combat. Their only goal is victory. His voice had been harsh, but truthful. This isn't a clean duel, Derrick continued. And even if you win, you may still be criticized. Daila's breath steadied as the memory replayed. Even so, he had added, you can still choose an ending where you win. Her fear slowly receded, replaced by a burning resolve. Another memory surfaced. Are you really fine with that? Derrick had asked, his gaze piercing. Of course. Daila had shouted back without hesitation. The memory shattered. She snapped back to reality. Her eyes sharpened as mana surged through her body. Raig gave her no time to recover. His attacks came in relentless succession, precise and unforgiving. Among mercenaries, Daila thought, there are people who win even when they're weaker. She lifted her gaze slightly. Those people don't duel, she murmured. They fight. Raig struggled to keep pace as he unleashed another sharp attack. The strike grazed past Daila's side, the wind pressure slicing dangerously close. She dodged just in time, feeling the chill of near impact. By fighting, her thoughts continued, they control the battlefield using terrain and timing. She forced herself to calm down. Instead of retreating further, Daila suddenly lowered her body and dropped to the ground. They use every method available to seize victory. Another attack lunged toward her. They never waste even a brief moment when their opponent lowers their guard. Raig's magic collided with her barrier again. This time, cracks spread rapidly across its surface. The shield trembled violently, teetering on the verge of collapse. Cold sweat slid down Daila's back. This is getting bad, she muttered through clenched teeth. Raig's voice cut through the tension. The game is over. He lunged forward. For a split second, Daila froze as the attack closed in. Then, boom! A violent explosion shook the ground. Stone shattered, and thick dust surged upward, swallowing the battlefield entirely. Derrick stood rigid, eyes locked on the smoke-filled arena. Daila, her mate screamed. From the stands, Daila's mother shot to her feet, panic flooding her face. Daila, she cried, turning sharply toward the butler. Dallin, what are you doing? Stop the spell now, she's hurt. Her husband's voice cut through her panic. Sit down. The Duke's tone was firm, commanding. His gaze never left the battlefield. It's not over. But you saw it yourself, his wife protested. She was clearly hit. Wrong, the Duke interrupted sharply. General Phantom's magic circle didn't activate. He exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. Then he glanced sideways at Derrick. The young man hadn't even blinked. It was as if he had expected this outcome from the very beginning. On the battlefield, Raig stared into the smoky ground, confusion flashing across his face. She should have been hit, he muttered. Then why didn't the magic circle activate? Where did she go? His eyes widened. Movement. Crystals of sharp energy erupted from the ground beside him. Raig barely dodged, leaping away with a curse. His heart pounded as realization struck. The attack came from below the platform. If she left the platform, that should count as a loss, he thought sharply. Then he hesitated. His gaze flicked toward the butler. Does being below the platform not count as leaving it? Raig clenched his teeth. They probably never imagined a trick like this being used in a noble spar. Another attack burst from beneath the ground. He avoided it by a hair's breadth, his breathing growing heavier with each exchange. I can't even see her, he admitted grimly. Landing a hit like this will be difficult. His expression darkened. All she needs is one clean blow. This spar doesn't resemble a noble duel at all. Finally, Raig spotted her. Daila emerged from the ground, dirt clinging to her clothes. Slowly, she straightened and looked up at him. Rage burned in her crimson eyes, far removed from the calm expression she usually wore. Raig stiffened. I've seen that look before, he realized. The same look Derrick had worn when my older brother grabbed him by the collar. Raig's gaze snapped toward Derrick. There's no way she came up with this alone. His teeth ground together. That bastard, Derrick, this was your plan. With a sharp motion, Raig removed his black coat and tossed it aside. His stance shifted completely, all traces of playfulness gone. Fine, he said coldly. I'll play along with your scheme, Derrick. The attack from below had shaken Raig more than he expected. The strike to the lower part of the arena burned in his memory, not just in his body. Instead of fear, it left him sharper, colder. Above the battlefield, Daila's mother leaned forward, eyes wide. She had noticed something wrong in the dust bowl beneath the platform. Daila had slipped under it. Panic rose in her voice as she called out for the fight to stop. But her husband, head of the family, remained calm. No rule had been broken. He told her to wait. His gaze stayed fixed on the field, curiosity growing stronger than concern. Beneath the platform, hidden in the thick dust, Daila sat still. Her breathing was steady despite the noise above. Her eyes glowed faintly as she used her magic to disturb Raig's focus. She could feel the mana in the air like threads brushing against her skin. Every current, every shift, was clear to her. She locked onto it with pure determination. Above her, Raig clenched his teeth and tried to cast again. Ice formed beneath his feet without warning. He jumped back just in time. Anger flashed across his face. She was targeting his feet whenever he began an incantation. If this continued, he would lose. Then he saw it, the tall pole with the flag standing at the center of the arena. An idea formed instantly. Under the platform, Daila felt the mana flow pause. He had stopped casting. That meant he was planning. She narrowed her eyes in the darkness. Whatever he tried next, she would strike the moment he began another spell. Above, the butler called out nervously as Raig started climbing the pole. Higher and higher he went, until the distance between them stretched thin. From that height, her sensing ability weakened. Raig understood it. She should not be able to detect him from there. Proper incantation would not work at this range, so he chose a different path. He gathered mana directly into his palm. Blue light flared around him like a silent storm. No chant. No wasted breath. He would destroy the entire platform in one strike. The energy hardened into a glowing arrow and shot downward. It slammed into the base of the pole with a violent crack. On the sidelines, Derrick watched calmly, his expression unreadable. The wood split. The pole trembled, then tipped. Raig leapt away just as it crashed down. The platform shattered beneath the impact. Dust burst upward in a thick cloud that swallowed everything. Daila's mother screamed his name in terror. Raig landed hard on the ground, covering his mouth as dust filled the air. He coughed, eyes burning. Through the haze, he spotted her. Daila stood only a short distance away, completely covered in gray powder. She could barely see. She was coughing too, blind in the cloud. Raig raised his hand immediately. A mana arrow formed and shot forward, cutting through the dust like lightning. At the last second, Daila sensed it. She turned sharply and tried to cast, but her mana slipped from her grasp. A thin line of blood appeared on her forehead as the string of energy grazed her skin. She forced her body aside and the arrow missed by a breath. Raig prepared another attack. He had the advantage at close range. Just one more arrow and it would be over. Daila ran, putting distance between them. He chased, gathering mana again. But before his thought could finish, she appeared from his blind side. Her foot struck his chest with all the strength she had left. His eyes widened in shock as the impact drove the air from his lungs. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest. Pain spread sharply through him. Daila did not hesitate. She scooped up a handful of dust and threw it straight into his eyes. He cried out, blinded, anger rising hotter than the pain. While he struggled to clear his vision, she leapt back onto the broken ground. When he finally wiped the dust away, he stared at her in disbelief. Kicks, sand, anything she could use, then left. She had almost no mana left, yet she refused to stop. She was fighting with everything she had, even knowing the odds were against her. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet. This duel was meant to prove her worth. As her brother, he would answer her resolve with his own. The sun had climbed high into the afternoon sky. Its light fell harsh and bright over the ruined arena. Daila pressed her hand to her forehead, trying to stop the bleeding. When she pulled it away, blood still flowed down her face and dripped onto the ground. Her vision blurred for a moment. Then a memory surfaced. Derrick's voice echoed in her mind. Mana is paint. Spellcasting is the brush. Gather the free paint and shape it into an image. She remembered the night he showed her his own mana flowing gently into the sky, clearing the darkness so others could see. Back in the present, Daila closed her eyes. She focused not on fear, not on pain, but on the flow around her. Slowly, the mana answered. It wrapped around her body like a thin shield. The more she imagined it as paint waiting for her brush, the steadier it became. She gathered every last drop into her hand. She could feel it at her fingertips, ready to take form. A large spell circle spread beneath her feet, glowing bright against the broken ground. From it, a sharp ice spear emerged beside her. The butler stared in shock. Daila's mother gasped. 1-star magic. Across from her, Raig felt a flicker of unease. Ice spears. So she had reached that level. He gathered his own mana, forming multiple arrows at once. Even so, he believed he was still one step ahead. If he struck first, he would win. They moved at the same instant. Daila thrust her hand forward, sending the ice spear flying with full force. Raig released his arrows in a storm of blue light. The attacks collided midair. A massive explosion tore across the arena. Blue energy burst outward in every direction, forming a wide circle that crackled with yellow lightning. The shockwave slammed into the watching parents, leaving them stunned. Dust swallowed the field once again. When it cleared slightly, Raig stood breathing heavily, drained from the effort. Across from him, Daila remained silent, chest rising and falling with equal strain. And nearby, Derrick watched without a word, his calm gaze fixed on the aftermath. 1 year ago, 3 small birds huddled on a thin branch outside the Duplain castle. Their mother leaned down, feeding them one by one as they chirped with bright hunger and simple joy. The sound was alive, it echoed softly against cold walls that had witnessed far heavier things. Inside the corridor, the Duke walked with steady steps, his butler trailing half a pace behind. The butler spoke of a letter that had arrived at the Duplain residence that morning, something about a gathering soon to take place. His voice was careful, formal, filling the air with matters of rank and duty. But the Duke was not listening. His gaze had drifted past polished floors and tall windows toward a half-open door. Inside that room, his daughter sat alone on a chair. Her posture was small. Her face looked drained of light. The sight caught him harder than any news ever could. The scene shifted to the training grounds from earlier that day. Daila stood beneath an open sky, her breath uneven, her magic nearly spent. Across from her sat her opponent, Reg. The barrier shield still shimmered faintly between them, proof that the match had ended. She had lost. The weight of it pressed on her chest as she looked up at the sky, as if searching for an answer written in the clouds. There was none. Only silence. Her teacher stood nearby, shoulders lowered. He did not speak. He did not need to. His bowed head said enough. He had believed in her. He had trained her. Yet the result stood plainly before them. Daila's vision blurred. The first tear fell, then another, until the restraint she tried to hold shattered completely. She cried loudly, openly, without grace. It was not the quiet weeping of a noble lady. It was the raw cry of someone who had given everything and still fallen short. From a distance, the Duke watched. His face remained calm, unreadable. Beside him, his wife burned with anger. Her voice rose sharply, demanding to know how something so rough and brutal could be called a magic spar. She questioned the teacher, the training, the very idea of allowing such harshness for a young lady of Duplain. Her outrage filled the space like fire seeking fuel. But the Duke did not turn toward her. His eyes stayed fixed on Daila. Her sobs grew softer but did not stop. She wiped her face again and again, trying to clear the tears that would not obey her. The Duke's thoughts moved elsewhere, to a memory from years ago. A young knight had once stood proudly before the king, introducing himself as Raymond Oswald Duplain. His voice had been strong, full of honor. The king had praised him, speaking of his father and the bright ambition in his eyes. The Duke remembered that look well. He had seen the same fire before. The present returned. Daila still stood on the field, smaller than the knight in his memory, yet somehow connected to that same unbroken line. The Duke studied her tear-stained face. The despair was clear. But beneath it, something else flickered. It was faint, fragile, but alive. He thought quietly that the look in her eyes had changed. It had grown sharper, harder. Pain had carved something into her that comfort never could. Daila finally stopped crying, though tears still clung to her lashes. Two maids rushed toward her in panic, calling her name, asking if she was hurt, insisting she needed treatment at once. Their hands reached for her sleeves. Without looking at them, she pushed one hand aside. The gesture was not violent, but it was firm. The maids froze in shock. She did not want comfort. Not now. She walked toward Reg instead. He had risen to his feet, uncertain, as if unsure how to stand before someone he had just defeated. When she stopped in front of him, he looked down, words stumbling in his throat. He managed a brief, awkward praise for her effort. She lowered her head in return. No excuses. No anger. Only acknowledgement. Then she turned away. The maids hurried after her again, offering to escort her back to her chambers. She ignored them and continued forward alone. Each step seemed heavy, but steady. When she reached her teacher, she stopped. He looked at her in silence. For a moment, she held herself together. Then the tears returned, quieter this time. She wiped them quickly and spoke only two simple truths. She had lost. And she was sorry. The teacher looked at Daila for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and placed his hands firmly on her shoulders. His grip was steady, not gentle, but grounding. He told her it was all right. Losing was not the end. Frustration was not shame. It was fuel. If she used it well, she would climb higher and grow stronger. His voice carried no pity, only belief. The word struck her harder than the defeat itself. Something inside her broke again. She cried out, louder than before, the pain spilling from her chest without restraint. A maid hurried closer, unsure whether to touch her. Before she could act, the Duchess rushed forward. She dropped to her knees on the dirt without caring for her dress and held her daughter's face in both hands. Her voice trembled as she wiped away Daila's tears, whispering that she could not believe her child had endured something so harsh. She called her baby, her precious girl, as if Daila were still small enough to hide behind her skirts. Daila looked at her mother through blurred eyes and called her softly. The Duchess pulled her into a tight embrace, repeating that it was all right now, that everything would be fine. She urged her to receive treatment first, to rest. Tears gathered again in Daila's eyes, but this time she swallowed them back. She forced herself to stand straight. She would not cry again in front of everyone. With the maids surrounding her, she finally allowed herself to be led away. The Duchess remained kneeling for a second after Daila left. Only when her daughter disappeared from sight did her composure crack. She covered her mouth with a handkerchief and wept quietly. The teacher turned to leave as well, his duty for the day done. But he sensed movement behind him. The Duchess rose quickly and strode toward him. He paused and glanced back. Her hand struck his face before he could fully turn. The sound was sharp. She called him vulgar, demanded to know if he understood what he had done. So what if he had taught her one-star magic? Did he think that made him impressive? Her anger burned without restraint. The teacher did not defend himself. He did not raise a hand. He simply endured. She grabbed his collar and shook him, accusing him of staining something pure. She said he had filled the Grand Duke's daughter with cheap tricks, with disgraceful methods unfit for a noble lady. Another slap followed. Still he remained silent. Her voice grew harsher, claiming there was a world he could never understand, a world of dignity and value that common trash could not touch. The Duke stepped between them at last. The Duchess turned to him, desperate for agreement, insisting that what had happened was not proper magic sparring. But before she could finish, his hand struck her across the face. The shock silenced the courtyard. She stared at him, unable to speak. He asked quietly if she knew who was behaving most vulgarly at that moment. Her lips trembled as she tried to protest, reminding him that the man was only a commoner. The Duke did not deny it. Yes, he said, the teacher was a worthless commoner. But he was also their daughter's teacher. What parent in the world treated their child's teacher in such a manner? His voice was heavy, not loud, yet it carried more weight than any shout. The teacher stood still, eyes lowered, offering no complaint. The Duke then stepped in front of him and bowed his head. He asked for forgiveness on behalf of his wife, explaining that everyone had their own way of loving a child. The teacher looked at him and said it was all right. Nothing more. The Duke straightened and said they had something to discuss privately. He ordered him to follow to the audience room. Together they walked back into the castle, their footsteps echoing through stone halls. Behind them, the Duchess watched with fury still burning in her chest, but she said nothing. Inside his study, the Duke sat at his desk and lifted his pen. Papers lay before him, already prepared. He spoke calmly, saying the teacher had raised Daila splendidly. As the master of the estate, he must grant an appropriate reward. The highest realm permitted to a commoner was not something offered lightly. Ink touched parchment as he began to write. Then he looked up and asked directly if the man desired 3-star magic. The teacher's expression shifted, just slightly. Surprise flickered across his face before settling into something deeper. His eyes, dark red and steady, met the Duke's gaze. The Duke studied him carefully and thought that the man understood him well, perhaps even better than he understood himself. This was not a simple instructor. This was a 5-star mage, a Grand Duke who recognized talent and ambition when he saw it. Opportunity had been placed on the table. When chances appeared, they had to be seized. The teacher's face darkened with resolve. His voice was low, almost quiet, but firm. Yes, he wanted it. The discussion began in the Duke's study, the air quiet and controlled. The Duke spoke first. The teacher had guided Daila well into using 1-star magic. That much was clear. But in Ebelstein's high society, such a level was not enough to survive. His voice was even, not harsh, yet firm enough to leave no space for argument. The teacher listened closely, standing straight without lowering his guard. When it was his turn to respond, he said there were many capable people within Duplain who could continue guiding Lady Daila. Now that she had grasped the feeling of magic, she would grow quickly. He did not speak with pride, only reason. The Duke replied at once. What his daughter needed was not simply an instructor who passed down spells. She needed a teacher. A different weight rested in that word. A drop of ink fell from the Duke's pen. He folded his hands and looked directly at the man before him. As a commoner, he said, the teacher was harboring an ambition far greater than he was permitted to dream of. The teacher remained still. In truth, the Grand Duke had never spoken this much to him before. Yet now every word cut straight to the point. The Duke continued, asking if he understood how insulting that ambition must feel to the lofty nobles. Such thoughts alone could provoke resentment. He was willing to overlook it only because it was him. The teacher lowered his head slightly. In his mind, he admitted the truth. The Duke knew he was aiming beyond 3-star magic, toward 4-star and higher. That awareness made the Duke even more frightening. The Duke resumed writing. If the teacher had truly embraced that intention, he could not remain in a place like this for long. He was already prepared to leave, wasn't he? The teacher answered that he was. The Duke lifted his gaze again. He was not ignorant of the teacher's ambition. Even so, he must continue teaching Daila a little longer. Then he mentioned the highest realm permitted to a commoner. The teacher listened more closely than before. Finally, the Duke asked plainly if he wanted 3-star magic. The teacher did not hesitate. He said yes. The scene shifted. The teacher entered the estate library. Shelves filled the room from wall to wall. He pulled out a book and opened it, flipping through the pages slowly. It was impressive. Many people spent their entire lives trying to obtain even a single 2-star spellbook. Yet here, every shelf held 3-star spellbooks. With this much knowledge gathered in one place, there was more than enough reason to remain in this estate longer. If Pelline were to find out, she would raise hell. A brief image of her drinking beer in a bar crossed his mind. The next morning, the sky was bright and open. 2 birds flew freely across the sunlight. Daila approached the teacher. She looked slightly embarrassed, but there was a shine in her expression she could not hide. Clearing her throat, she declared that she was now a 1-star mage. The teacher sat reading and answered calmly that since she had used 1-star magic, even once, she could be called a 1-star mage. She smiled proudly at that. But then she noticed he was not paying much attention. She dropped her hand on the table and demanded if that was all. Her apprentice had made progress, and he was not even happy. Without lifting his eyes from the book, he replied that it was not an achievement he had earned. She huffed, admitting that it had not been easy at all. He observed that she seemed to have recovered well over the past 3 days. Back then, she had looked like she was crying her eyes out. Her cheeks immediately turned red. She denied it quickly, claiming it had only been dust in her eyes. Then, with frustration slipping into her tone, she added that her father should have told her sooner. She had thought the teacher was being dismissed. The teacher looked at her and suggested they begin the lesson. She was growing quickly, so she would learn the other 1-star spells soon enough. Her curiosity returned at once. She asked what he meant by quick. He explained that her growth was uncommon. It was rare to use 1-star magic so soon after manifestation. She brightened immediately, declaring that she was exactly the kind of person who accomplished what she set out to do. Excitement rushed out of her in a stream. She asked what they would start with. Magic arrow sounded convenient without a chant. Wind blade, like the one Reg used, looked strong. Ice spear had felt amazing as well. If she practiced more, she would be able to strike even Reg. He cut her off. She would practice magic manifestation. Her expression fell at once. She asked why. Weren't they supposed to learn 1-star spells? He answered that there were many reasons, but in the end, the basics mattered most. If explained simply, it came down to mana. Her shoulders dropped. The excitement drained from her face. She turned away slightly and agreed in a low voice. If he said so, then it was what it was. She had gotten excited for nothing, thinking they would begin new spells. The teacher watched her reaction, not fully understanding the sudden shift in her mood, but the decision remained unchanged. The foundation came first. Daila looked at the teacher and noticed he was already watching her closely. His eyes did not move away. She frowned slightly and asked why he was staring at her like that, wondering if there was something on her face. He quickly denied it and said it was only surprising to see her listen so obediently. A faint blush spread across her cheeks. She turned her face to the side and protested, asking what he took her for. She insisted she had respected his words from the very beginning. The teacher repeated that phrase in mild disbelief. From the beginning? He reminded her calmly that on their first meeting she had poured dirty water over his head, twice. The memory struck her pride. Her shoulders lowered, and she asked quietly if he still remembered that. He answered that it was hard to forget. Embarrassment settled heavily on her. To escape it, she suddenly forced a laugh and looked up at the sky. She declared the weather was wonderful and that magic manifestation sounded exciting. They should hurry and practice. She kept repeating how fun it would be, her voice slightly too bright. The teacher understood the change of topic. He knew she was trying to recover her dignity. Instead of pointing it out, he allowed it. A faint smile crossed his face, but he said nothing and continued the lesson as if nothing had happened. When night fell, the moonlight covered the castle in silver. Daila lay flat on the training ground, exhausted from hours of practice. Her breathing was heavy, chest rising and falling rapidly. Sweat clung to her hair. The teacher, however, remained standing, steady and composed. He mentioned casually that he had heard she would soon become busier. She exhaled deeply and pushed herself up to sit on the ground. He sat beside her. She admitted that starting next week she would have etiquette and general education classes as well. She sounded uncertain. He asked if that was not a good thing. She had learned one-star magic, and now she would receive true noble education. She stared up at the sky instead of answering directly. Then she asked if he truly thought she was happy about it. She listed the subjects one by one: basic noble etiquette, foreign languages, geography, history, botany, piano, sewing. She did not understand why she had to learn all of it. She wondered how Aisline had endured everything and still stood proudly at the center of Ebelstein's high society. The teacher answered simply that was why Aisline was called the flower of Duplain. Daila lowered her voice and admitted that she only wanted to study magic. He told her then to do it. The Duke had hired him, so they had enough freedom. She hesitated, unsure whether they truly had that much time. He asked calmly if there was anyone who could drive him out now. She turned toward him and smiled slightly, saying her father had acknowledged him, but her mother was not the type to accept that quietly. He asked why the Duchess wanted to remove him. Daila explained that her mother likely feared she would drift away from noble dignity if she continued learning from him. Even that day's spar had lacked the elegance nobles preferred. He listened without reacting. Then he said it was nothing special. She did not understand. He told her that silencing her mother was not difficult. They simply had to remove her pretext. The meaning did not fully settle in her mind. The next morning, sunlight filled the castle halls. The Duchess sat alone, troubled. She wondered how her daughter had ended up with such an indecent teacher. In her imagination, the teacher was leading Daila down dark paths, teaching her rough mercenary habits. She pictured Daila kidnapping people while proudly following his instructions. In another imagined scene, Daila stormed into high society dragging a wild boar, laughing while nobles screamed in fear. The absurd images made her head ache. She pressed her temples and sighed. Even if her husband acknowledged that man, she was the mistress of the estate. She would find a way to remove him. She stepped outside, still lost in thought, and found Daila standing before her. The Duchess called her name in surprise. For a brief second, she imagined the childish daughter who used to run into her arms with a bright smile. Tears gathered in her eyes at that memory. But the girl before her now stood composed and graceful. Daila greeted her politely and asked if she had rested well. The sudden maturity left the Duchess speechless. Daila continued gently, apologizing for not being able to leave the annex while recovering from her injuries. She said she had wanted to speak properly but had a piano lesson that morning and a tight general education schedule. The Duchess could only nod. Then she asked if Daila's etiquette lessons had not yet begun. Daila answered with a calm smile that they would start next week and that she was looking forward to them thanks to her mother's consideration. The Duchess, unsettled but pleased, told her to hurry or she would be late. As Daila walked down the path, a maid accidentally dropped a bundle of wood. Daila stopped and looked at her. Instead of passing by, she smiled softly and asked if the maid was hurt. She told her not to overstrain herself. The maid stared in shock at the unexpected kindness and answered respectfully. Daila then continued on her way, posture straight, steps measured, leaving behind a silence filled with quiet surprise. Later that same day, the scene settled in the Ebelstein noble district. An angel statue stood at the heart of the castle garden. In the garden of the castle, Lady sat at a round table set for tea. Elant said, Rosia's salon had been full of laughter. The gatherings felt lighter than before. But at the last meeting, Aisline had seemed troubled, weighed down by worry. Elant had noticed it clearly. She had been concerned. Aisline blinked in surprise. She had not realized her feelings had shown so openly. With a small, composed smile, she lifted her teacup and admitted that she had indeed been worried at the time. However, most of the problem had already been resolved. She felt much better now. Her tone was calm, steady, almost relieved. Elant felt genuine relief hearing that. Lady Elant Alphione Belmiard, second daughter of House Belmiard. Still, another matter remained in her mind. She had heard a rumor that Aisline had left the noble district personally to save someone. The thought alone had unsettled her. Noble daughters did not step outside their protected world without serious reason. She admitted she had been deeply worried when she heard it. Aisline thanked her gently for the concern. Then she explained the reason. Her younger sister, Daila, had needed a magic teacher. Finding the right person had not been simple. So Aisline had chosen to go herself. The word sounded straightforward, but Alant's thoughts sharpened instantly. Aisline had gone in person? For a teacher? That meant the person must be extraordinary. A noble lady would never lower herself to personally seek someone ordinary. She kept her pleasant expression, hiding the curiosity forming behind her calm eyes. Lady Denise Linier Veltus, second daughter of House Veltus, who had been listening quietly, joined the conversation with a polite smile. The teacher was for Lady Daila, she confirmed. Aisline nodded. Not long ago she had visited the mansion and seen Daila again. The change had been remarkable. Her younger sister had grown into a proper young lady, so refined that she was almost unrecognizable. Aisline continued, her voice carrying quiet pride. Daila had manifested one-star magic. Her conduct was neat and composed. Seeing her progress had even made Aisline feel she needed to work harder herself. Denise kept her smile steady, but doubt flickered in her thoughts. Deplain had always kept Daila hidden. Why speak so openly now? Something about this situation felt unusual. Still, she simply remarked that it seemed Aisline had found a good teacher. Aisline agreed without hesitation. The teacher did not hold noble status, she admitted, but his ability was exceptional. It had truly been worth traveling all the way to the Beldun mercenary corps to find him personally. At that, both Alant and Denise paused. A mercenary. The word settled heavily between them. Alant's thoughts drifted to an earlier memory. She recalled how a cook once ran from the Deplain estate in tears, speaking of Daila's harsh behavior. Daila had once been known as wild, even cruel. Yet now she was disciplined, refined, and a one-star mage. To reform someone like that required more than simple skill. It required strength and control. Alant took a slow sip of tea, hiding the intensity of her thoughts. Whoever this teacher was, he was not ordinary. If Daila continued to grow, his name would inevitably spread through noble society. It would be wise to know it sooner rather than later. With a warm smile, she finally asked for the teacher's name. Aisline seemed mildly confused by the sudden curiosity. Lady Alant said, if he was guiding Daila, he would surely become famous in the future. It would not hurt to know in advance. Lady Aisline did not question it. Her answer came easily, spoken in a calm, natural tone. His name was Derrick. The scene shifted quietly into the sitting chamber of the grand mansion, where Lady Daila sat beside her mother on an embroidered sofa. Daila spoke with visible enthusiasm, explaining that Derrick had also been teaching her a little etiquette. She admitted that etiquette was truly difficult to learn on her own. Her mother responded with a composed smile, saying she understood and that it was admirable for Daila to study by herself. However, Daila quickly clarified that it was less that she had studied alone and more that Derrick had patiently taught her. Her mother then asked what had been so difficult when she tried studying independently. Daila laughed lightly and answered that most of it had been difficult. She added, still smiling, that she could manage even this much only thanks to Derrick. At that moment, irritation flared within her mother. Though her face remained calm and her smile steady, her thoughts were anything but peaceful. But that damn Derrick, how many times was that name going to come up? She raged inwardly. She did not know what he had done to Daila, but she could not simply let things continue this way. There had to be some way around it. When their conversation ended, she excused herself with quiet dignity, concealing the anger that simmered beneath her refined exterior. The scene shifted again as she moved through the mansion halls, determined to gather information. She began questioning the household staff. Approaching a maid first, she casually inquired about Lady Daila's recent behavior. The maid smiled warmly and replied that Lady Daila had been especially kind to the servants lately. She had grown much gentler. Unsatisfied, the mother continued her inquiry and spoke to a gardener. The gardener also smiled and remarked that Lady Daila seemed to be in a very good mood these days. She had become so gentle and had changed remarkably in just a few weeks. Finally, she turned to the butler. The butler paused thoughtfully before saying it was truly surprising, as that kind of refined demeanor was something he had only ever seen in Lady Aisline. Perhaps Lady Daila was finally trying to be reborn as a true lady, he suggested. There was now a noble dignity about her that had not been present before. Each of these opinions only deepened the mother's anger. Her face flushed red, though she forced herself to remain composed. Instead of exposing her fury, she quietly withdrew, her mind burning with resentment as night descended upon the estate. The scene shifted once more to the castle grounds under the dark sky. Outside, beneath the faint glow of moonlight, Derrick was practicing his magic. Sweat dripped from his forehead as exhaustion weighed heavily on him, yet he refused to stop. Blue energy flickered around his hands as he focused intensely, attempting to refine his control. The aura flared briefly, brighter than before, but the strain proved too much. He collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. As he lay there catching his breath, he sensed something unusual. Turning his head, he saw Raig, Daila's former opponent, standing nearby. Raig apologized lightly, asking if he had interrupted Derrick's training. Derrick pushed himself up slightly and assured him that he had not. He then asked what had brought Raig there. The two sat on the ground together beneath the night sky. Raig explained that he had wanted to talk about Daila. Derrick nodded, listening. Before continuing, Raig noticed the book in Derrick's hand and asked if it was a 3-star spell book. Derrick confirmed that it was and explained that his grace had lent it to him. Raig was visibly shocked that such a valuable book had been entrusted to Derrick. Derrick admitted that it was currently beyond his level, but there was no harm in studying ahead. In that moment, a memory surfaced of the Duke firmly declaring that Derrick was a true mage while handing him the book. Raig, still impressed, murmured that it truly was remarkable. Returning to the original topic, Derrick asked what about Lady Daila had prompted Raig to seek him out. Raig lowered his head slightly, appearing nervous. Blushing faintly, he admitted that the matter was complicated and then awkwardly asked what teenage girls liked these days. Derrick listened carefully. Growing even more flustered, Raig suggested that if he embroidered a doll that looked like Daila, would she like it? Derrick immediately imagined a frighteningly detailed doll and responded with firm anger that she absolutely would not. Raig quickly retreated, admitting he had suspected as much and insisting he was not truly planning to make one. He laughed awkwardly and stood, suggesting they head inside if Derrick was finished training. Derrick rose as well, and together they began walking back toward the castle. As they walked, Raig expressed his gratitude. Derrick did not immediately understand. Raig explained that the mood within the household had improved lately. Even Valerian had been focusing more on managing the territory, and though their father did not show it openly, he seemed satisfied. Derrick responded that it was difficult to read his grace's feelings. Raig smiled, noting that everyone in the mansion would agree with that. Raig then stopped walking and looked up at the night sky. Quietly, he said he supposed he needed to accept what he must. People could change, especially children at that age. He did not know whether he had simply failed to notice Daila's change sooner or had been avoiding it, but since she had changed, he felt he should change as well. Turning toward Derrick, he thanked him sincerely, saying it was thanks to him. Derrick did not respond verbally, nor did he look at Raig. Instead, they resumed walking. After a moment, Raig mentioned that Daila's magic had felt like a different kind altogether. Derrick asked if he had noticed the difference. Raig replied that it had felt like drawing a picture. Inwardly, Derrick acknowledged Raig's perceptiveness, thinking that a genius truly was a genius. It should not have been easy to notice that distinction. Derrick explained that Lady Daila used the mana operation of the School of the Wild. Each person's way of using mana differed greatly. Once she reached a certain level, she would study on her own without needing his instruction. At that point, a teacher's interference could even become a hindrance. Raig nodded thoughtfully. That level, he murmured, her time to shine would eventually come. 2 months later, the atmosphere within the mansion had grown noticeably lighter. The scene opened on Daila seated gracefully at her dressing table. A small arrangement of fresh flowers rested upon the polished surface before her. She tilted her head slightly and asked her maid why the flowers had been brought. The maid replied warmly that they had bloomed so prettily in the garden that morning, and she thought they would look lovely woven into Daila's hair. Daila gently picked up one of the blossoms and inhaled its fragrance. Smiling softly, she remarked that they smelled wonderful. It felt, she said, as though spring had already lingered for months. As the maid carefully arranged her hair, Daila reflected aloud on how much had changed. She was already comfortable using even 1-star magic now, and she had grown much closer to the servants. Her smile deepened with quiet radiance as she admitted that she must have missed so much before. She believed it was all thanks to Derrick. The maid observed that Daila looked especially happy that day and teasingly asked whether it was magic lesson day. Daila brightened and asked if she truly looked that happy. When the maid lifted the flowers again to place them neatly, Daila suddenly requested one of the leftover blossoms so she could give it to Derrick. However, the mood shifted the moment she entered a room. The flower slipped from her hand and fell soundlessly to the floor. She froze in place, shock overtaking her as tears welled in her eyes. Trembling, she asked what he meant. Derrick's voice remained steady as he replied that she had heard him correctly. There was nothing left for him to teach her. And as the silence settled heavily between them, it felt as though the unspoken truth echoed like a changing season. Just as there is no eternal winter, there is no eternal spring. The scene shifted to the Duke's office. Derrick was seated in the room. He said that His Grace had likely noticed as well that Lady Daila belonged to the school of the wild, and among them, her trait was especially strong. Her nature was not one that should be restrained. If he involved himself with her any further, he admitted, he would only end up breaking her wings. The Duke listened in silence. After a brief pause, he said that he understood. If that was the case, then there was no longer any reason for Derrick to remain in the mansion. Derrick answered simply that this was correct. The Duke seemed as though he wished to say something more, but the words did not come. Instead, he stood from his chair. Derrick noticed the movement but remained silent. The Duke walked to the window and stood there, looking outside rather than at Derrick. He spoke while facing away. Thanks to Derrick, many things had changed. Because of him, his daughter had been able to grow. He admitted that he had been so consumed with managing the territory that he had not been a good father. The responsibilities of his position had taken his attention away from his child. Yet now, he said quietly, he was relieved. Then came the most difficult question. Still looking out the window, the Duke asked when Derrick would leave. Derrick replied that he had heard Lady Eislein would soon visit the mansion and then return to Ebelstein. He planned to ride in her carriage at that time. The Duke responded with a quiet acknowledgement. Then, without turning, he said that Derrick would return the library key now. Derrick looked toward the Duke's back and answered that he would return the spellbooks he was currently reading and pass the key along through the head butler. The Duke directly replied that there was no need to do that. He was to return the key now. Derrick did not argue. He lowered his gaze to the level 3 spellbook in his hand. For a brief moment, he looked at it in silence. Then the Duke spoke again, saying that if there was nothing else, he may go. Derrick's expression dulled slightly, but he did not speak. He stood, offered a respectful greeting to the Duke, who was still facing the window and did not turn around. After greeting him, Derrick left the office quietly. He walked down the corridor, his footsteps steady and unhurried. As he turned a corner, he encountered Daila. He stopped immediately. Daila looked at him with frustration and hurt. She asked how he could show up out of nowhere and now leave again out of nowhere. Derrick addressed her calmly as Lady Daila and said that it could not be helped. Daila replied that she knew he would not listen, but she would say it anyway. Her voice grew softer as she asked if he could not stay. Derrick did not respond at once. Instead, he stepped closer and lowered himself so that his eyes were level with hers. In a steady voice, he said that as he always had, he would be returning to life as a mercenary. He would continue studying magic. Once Lady Daila built up more skill, she would go to Ebelstein for her debutante. Daila lowered her head as tears formed in her eyes. The sadness she tried to contain was clear. Derrick gave a faint smile and told her they could meet again then. If his level rose a little more by that time, he would be able to teach her something new. Her sadness shifted into frustration. She called him annoying, saying he always said the right thing, leaving her with nothing to say back. The scene shifted to night. Lady Daila lay asleep in her bed, but her rest was restless. Sweat formed on her skin as she fell into a nightmare. In her dream, cruel voices surrounded her. They called her a useless child, an utterly incompetent child. They asked what she had to boast about besides her bloodline. They said she did not have even a speck of talent. They called her the shame of Duplain. They said someone like her should never have been born. Fear gripped her, and tears filled her eyes even within the dream. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and shouted no. She woke abruptly, breathing heavily. Her heart pounded, and her head ached slightly. After a moment, she realized it had only been a nightmare. A maid rushed into her room, alarmed. She called out to Lady Daila and asked if she was all right. She said she had heard shouting and wanted to know what had happened. Daila looked at the maid in silence. In that fragile moment, she remembered the way she used to behave. A thought slowly formed in her mind. What if she created a pretext? What if she returned to slapping the maid in the face like before, throwing tantrums and causing trouble? Then Derrick would have to stay for her, wouldn't he? She considered it seriously. If she became the problem again, perhaps he would not be able to leave. The maid asked again if something was wrong, if Lady Daila was feeling unwell anywhere. For a brief second, Daila almost shouted at her. But she stopped herself. Instead, she answered calmly that she was fine. Inside, she made a decision. She was not going to do something like that anymore. She smiled gently and told the maid she was fine and not to worry. As the maid relaxed, Daila lay back against her pillow. She understood something clearly now. That would not make her valuable. The scene shifted to morning as the sun rose and bathed the castle in golden light. The air felt fresh, and the quiet of departure lingered in the courtyard. Lady Isline was already seated inside the carriage, waiting. Derrick arrived carrying his luggage, his expression calm and composed. Lady Isline looked at him and asked if dropping him off by the commercial district would be fine. Derrick replied that he would appreciate that. She smiled gently and told him to go and say his goodbyes, as they would be departing soon. Derrick turned and looked behind him. Everyone was gathered there. The prince stepped forward first and asked if he truly was leaving. Derrick answered that he had to go back to where he came from. Rhaeg smiled faintly and said that life in the mansion could not have been easy and that Derrick had worked hard all this time. The prince added that if anything happened, Derrick should make sure to contact him and he would help as much as he could. Derrick lowered his head respectfully and thanked him. Then he raised his head and looked at Lady Daila. She was already looking at him. For a moment they simply stared at one another. Daila suddenly grew flustered and shouted, asking why he was looking at her like that. She demanded to know if he thought she was going to beg him not to go. She told him not to get the wrong idea, insisting she was not a child anymore. Derrick smiled gently and said it had been an honor to teach her. He added that he could not proudly declare himself her teacher, but he hoped she would remember the magic she had learned with him. Daila lifted her chin proudly and replied that she would proudly say he was her teacher. She teased that he would not be able to live quietly anymore since he was the teacher of the great Daila Catherine Duplain. Derrick did not show much reaction, but behind her confident smile, sadness was clear in her eyes. Turning her face slightly, blushing, she told him to take care of himself and not to do anything pointlessly dangerous and get hurt. Derrick answered that he would be fine and told her not to overexert herself either. Daila quickly declared that she was already an adult and could take care of herself now. She repeated the words firmly, as if trying to convince both him and herself. Her words stirred a memory within Derrick. He had once said the exact same lines, "I'm already an adult. I can take care of myself." He had spoken them to a woman who had responded by hugging him tightly. His eyes widened slightly at the memory. She had smiled and told him to take her words to heart. The present returned. Derrick spoke her name softly. Then he reached out and gently patted Daila's head. Her eyes widened in shock at the unexpected gesture. While patting her head, he told her that she did not need to become an adult so early. Tears gathered in Daila's eyes, but she did not let them fall. Derrick stepped back and turned away. Daila quickly wiped her face. As he began to leave, she shouted his name. Derrick stopped and turned around. Daila forced a bright smile and called out to him, telling him they would see each other again. She waved at him. Derrick lowered his head politely in farewell and said they would meet again in Ebelstein. Lady Daila. Tears finally filled her eyes as she answered softly, "Okay." And like that, Derrick left the castle. By evening, he arrived at the Ebelstein commercial district. Two men were shouting excitedly, urging someone on, telling them to kill him and beat him up more. Derrick stepped closer quietly, unnoticed. A blonde-haired lady was punching a boy, and blood stained the boy's face. She struck him again, then paused as if sensing something. She turned around. When she saw Derrick standing there, her expression brightened instantly. She called his name. Derrick looked at her steadily and said, simply, that he was back home.